Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming. I'm Grace Van Mill, and I'd like to welcome you tonight on behalf of MCIC, the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation. We're happy to be back with you for another Local Brews and Global Views discussion night. So as we begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm hosting this event from Winnipeg in Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and we're on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We're grateful for a chance to host this event, and thanks for joining. This evening's discussion will be done webinar style, so you'll be able to see the speaker and ask questions through our Q&A section. You can see here on my screen where to enter those questions, and I'll share them with Sean at the end, but feel free to enter them at any time. I may also ask a question of you. I have a quick question here I wanted to ask you. I'm going to launch a poll. Just curious where you're joining from tonight. So we know that when we're doing these things online, we can reach people from lots of different places. If you've joined us before, you know that we've had people from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and other provinces. So I'll give you a few minutes to answer that. It just is nice to see. It's fun when we can't ask you in person where you're joining from. It's nice to see you online. So let's see here. So we've got quite a few from Winnipeg, some from the rest of Manitoba, and some from another province. Well, welcome everyone. It's nice to have you here tonight. Sorry, my computer's frozen. So this event tonight, you'll know this if you've joined us before, is part of a series of coffee nights about global issues. So we used to do them in person. Right now we're doing them online, like lots of things in our lives. And we've talked about everything from community seed banks to conservation, women's rights, children's education, and so much more. So we regularly host events like this, all different kinds of events. So please sign up for our e-newsletter to hear about future events or follow us on social media. So if you don't know much about us, MCIC is a council of about 40 organizations working in international development and cooperation around the world. We work to engage Manitobans on global issues like the important work you're going to learn about tonight. And our vision is simple: a just world for all. And this event is sponsored in part by funding from Global Affairs Canada. And we just want to say we're really thankful for their support. Last Friday was World Children's Day. I just want to talk about that for a minute as we begin. This day was created by the United Nations to focus, on creating awareness of children's issues and improving children's welfare around the world. World Children's Day also marks the anniversary of the date that the UN General Assembly adopted both the Declaration and the Convention on Children's Rights. Last year marked the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and you can see a list of those rights in child-friendly language behind me on the screen. So, it's become the most widely ratified human rights treaty in history, and has helped transform children's lives around the world. We know this. So it's a time to celebrate that, but it's also a time to demand much needed action for child rights. And one of those rights is the right for children to get an education and to develop their talents and abilities. So with that thought in mind, I'd now like to introduce our speaker so we can learn more about this project and about Hope International's efforts to engage low-income youth in training and learning financial responsibility, computer skills, and even entrepreneurship. So I'm excited to hear more about how this program is helping youth, especially girls, to shape a better life for themselves and their families. So Sean, I invite you to share your screen while I introduce you next. I'll just stop sharing so you can do that. So Sean Burke is the Overseas Program Director at Hope International Development Agency, and he works with a team of project managers in Canada and a network of implementing partners in 16 countries around the world. Sean's various roles in community and international development, they include postings with the United Nations in Cambodia, the Philippines, Kenya, Tanzania, and Haiti. And that's really framed his drive for partner engagement and community-led programming. Sean also has degrees in environmental and natural resources management from Griffith University in Australia. So I know we're all looking forward to hearing more. Please join me in welcoming Sean. And to do that, we'll just put a plus sign in the chat. And welcome, Sean. I'll turn it over to you. And I think I maybe didn't click the buttons that will let you share your screen, so I will do that as well. Apologies. That is now set for you, Sean. So welcome, Sean. Feel free to put some pluses in the chat to welcome Sean here today. Okay. Sean, are you there?
I am. Thank you. So, yes, I've just...
Sorry about the glitch. That's my fault.
No problem at all. So I'm just going through the process of the screen sharing.
Great.
And
lots of applause in the chat here for you, such as it is, our plus sign applause that we do here. So lots of people supporting us tonight as we figure out these technological things together. So over to you.
Is that sharing now?
Yeah, sure is.
Super. So let me just pull up my notes. Great. And maybe I should have asked you this before, but is my face on the screen as well, or just the PowerPoint presentation?
It sure is. Yep, you're up and your PowerPoint. You're a small video inset.
Okay. So I'll make sure I don't pull any faces. And this is not yet alcohol, but going with the brews idea, just having some water. So thank you so much for having me on tonight. Obviously, we've been partnered with MCIC for quite a long time. And given that we have a connection with Manitoba, but we are also based in Vancouver. I haven't necessarily had too many opportunities to participate directly in these events. So I'm really grateful for COVID, dare I say, for the sort of the online format for this event for this year, so that I can participate. So thank you so much. Just to introduce Hope a little bit, this year we're actually celebrating our 45th year. So on the screen now, you can see a few stats to provide sort of like a snapshot of what we've done. The big ones for me are the 1,669 projects and working with 25 million people. So across 45 years, that sort of averages out to about 37 projects per year and about 550,000 people per year. We are headquartered in US, in Vancouver. We have implementing offices in Ethiopia and in Myanmar. We have fundraising offices in the United Kingdom, the USA, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and New Zealand. And we implement the majority of our projects, apart from our 2 implementing offices, through overseas community-based partners, where we have established and maintained long-standing working relationships. So in that way, that sort of aligns with our approach of making sure that our projects are community guided, community led, and community implemented, to make sure that they're benefiting the communities on the ground in the way they need it. So I need to figure out, there we go. So starting in 1975, we had some initial activities in Haiti, in Bangladesh, Thailand, Ethiopia. And so this is an interesting slide from our archive, which actually shows a photo of Clifford Dick right there in the center. And because he's actually really hot and sweaty, he's wrapped a shirt around his head. And it is actually with sad irony that he's actually leading or walking with some Tigrayan refugees on their way to Kamos in Sudan, in TPLF-controlled regions. And obviously, because of the current situation now in Ethiopia and the Tigrayan refugees going over to Sudan, it is that, I mean, that's one of the reasons I pulled up this photo, but you know, it just highlights sort of the current situation sort of being where it is now. So we've been in the area for a long time, but it's sad to see that situation as it is right now. And then just to show you some photos of some of our earlier work. So these are photos of Ethiopia So just to highlight some of our early work in Ethiopia. These are from the mid-80s, and you can see from the very start the projects relied on a lot of buy-in from the community. And the community investment was in the form of community participation, so the community digging the trenches to lay the pipes. And in that way, you know, obviously we ensure the community owns the projects and the community manages the outputs and also maintains the water system for years and years to come. So we still work on water projects in Ethiopia, and they've simply evolved in scope from initially where they were only water. Now they include sanitation, hygiene, self-help groups and women empowerment, and to agricultural support, nutritional support, and environmental support. So this next slide will be it's like a four-minute video of one of our water systems, sort of a current water system from 2016, again in Ethiopia, just to sort of showcase what our approach is.
Local people contribute lots of time, lots of their own sweat equity, and the combination results in great projects.
This is part of the community contributions. They contribute their labor. They carry materials to the point where the vehicle cannot take. It's a very big project with a capacity of 50,000 liters, and 14 kilometers of pipe installation will be conducted to 30 water points so that the community can fetch water from those water points. This is not only a water project, but a water and sanitation project.
ያ የተገነባው በቧንቧ እንዲወርድ ይደረጋል ወደ የሰፈራችሁ። የምትቀዱበት ጀሪካኖች ንጹህ ካልሆኑ፣ የምትጠጡበት ኩባያ ንጹህ ካልሆኑ ለብዙ በሽታዎች ተጋለጣችሁ ማለት ነው። ንጹህ ነው ንጹህ አይደለም።
አይሳኬ ጸጌሽ የጌሽ ድዌ
The Ethiopian staff is doing what I think is the best it can to ensure water systems last as long as possible.
This is a very exciting day for us and for the community. Their family, their grandma, their grandfather, generally their ancestors have been suffering for their whole life. Now they got pure water for their home consumption. So they are very happy today and they are very excited.
There we go. So I think a lot of the people in our office really get a kick out of what happens, what is our film crew that goes around and looks at all of our projects year on year, and I think it's so amazing to see the community involved, but also just the excitement that they will have when they celebrate the finish of the project. So what I'm showing you now is a page from our Impact Annual Report from 2019. And it just gives you an idea of sort of the continuity of how we are continuing to provide sort of a similar level of projects and impact year on year. And it gives you an idea of the countries that we're currently working in, and the number of people that we are helping year on year. The color bubbles categorize the types of initiatives that we are working on. And so if I turn that over to the next page, you can see that's clean water, food security and livelihood, and how that breaks down sort of in each row or each column gives you an idea of what our what our general theory of change is, and the different elements that fall within it. And then just to give you some context into our history with Myradha and India, which relates to this current project. Again, this is a photo of Clifford Dick standing up there on the right-hand side. And Clifford is the Director for International Relations, and he's also our country director in the US. And Cliff has obviously been involved with Hope for many years, as have a lot of our staff. So our current international president has been with Hope since the very beginning, and is one of our founders. So, but this particular photo was taken 10 years ago with a self-help affinity group, which Myradha is very famous for, and sort of demonstrates our ongoing involvement in India. Just a little about Myradha. So they've been in existence since 1968, and their original name was the Mysore Resettlements and Development Agency, based on their original work supporting the resettlement of Tibetan refugees between 1968 and 1982. And even though they no longer provide resettlement services per se, they've retained that name of Myradha. And since 1982, they shifted their focus to improved and sustainable livelihoods, where they started out developing self-help affinity groups. So I think most people have heard of the self-help group model, in order to improve the livelihood of poor families. And then they branched out into related areas of soil and water conservation, health, education, etc. So Myradha were actually quite instrumental in developing the initial SHG models and the SAG, or self-help affinity group, banking linkages. So for example, in this photo, which is a newspaper article from several years ago, Mr. Fernandez, who was the founder of Myradha, he used his own bank account in a pilot program that Myradha initiated with the Reserve Bank of India in 1987. And that became the impetus for a set of changes in rules in 1991, which allowed the SAG bank linkages to exist. So they were on the forefront of that particular change. And so we also run parallel SAG livelihood programming in Myradha, in villages in Kadiri, in Andhra Pradesh, and Erodi in Tamil Nadu, along with this project. And just to give you an example of the scope of the impact that Myradha has had, I don't have up-to-date statistics, but from September 2005, Myradha was working with over 9,000 self-affinity groups, which it's mind-blowing. So they've had a huge impact in India. So moving on to our project. So it's called Strengthening the Wellbeing of Urban Youth in Hosur City. It's obviously funded by our very generous host, Manitoba Council for International Cooperation, and it commenced in March 2019. It was due to finish in March 2020, but of course, due to COVID implications, it went through until I believe June 2020. So we also have an ongoing year of the project. So the project is currently ongoing. So Hosur City, it's an industrial location located in the northwest part of the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. So you'll see the map on the top right-hand corner. It's 35 kilometers southeast of Bangalore, and approximately 300 kilometers west of Chennai, which is the state capital. And it's a satellite city which is involved in a lot of manufacturing industries. In Tamil Nadu state, Myradha is currently supporting more than 400 self-help affinity groups. And in Hosur City, Myradha operates one of their 9 centres for institutional development and organisational reform, where they regularly host capacity building training for self-help groups, microfinance institutions, local businesses, post-secondary students and other NGOs. So this particular project complements the range of programs being undertaken by Marada in Tamil Nadu. Just to give you an idea of the context, so the photos here are actually of the slum areas in Hosur city, which is where this particular project is focused. India has an increasing urban poverty, which is obviously creating deep inequality. A third of the Indian population live in urban areas, and more than 25% live below the national poverty line. A quarter of the children are highly malnourished, and nearly 2/3 of families report being without regular income for at least 6 months per year. 10% of people who live in Hosur city actually live in urban slums. So it's a significant proportion of the population. So the poor, so due to the poverty, what's happening is many parents of the children in urban slums are engaged in daily labourer work, and that sometimes involves significant time away from the household. And this is leaving younger children in the care of grandparents, and it's leaving middle-aged youth, let's say 12, 13 to 18, generally self-directing their futures. So what Marada identified was a significant gap in this holistic support and vocational training for this youth group, which often gets missed. And another one of the issues was that many of the urban youth, especially girls, have role models who tend to be engaged in daily labourer work, and they really wanted to break that cycle. So the project works to give urban youth girls some urban survival skills per se, and role models that work in jobs that are not just daily labourer jobs, and therefore to give them a line of sight to a different life, and the possibility of helping them to achieve different economic outcomes to what their parents are involved in. And then particularly with these particular groups, they have a connection with their mothers usually have a connection with the self-help affinity groups that Marada is involved in. So in a way, the project is providing somewhat of a mini self-help group model for the youth, which doesn't involve the finances and the credit, but it's involving the skills and the skills training to complement that sort of pre-step going into the self-help affinity group mechanism of increasing livelihood skills and economic outcomes. So it sort of fits well with the sort of a sustainable line. This next short video on the next slide will actually show some of the girls in the children's groups presenting to the Marada board, and they're actually talking about some of the role models that they've been researching and learning about.
Her mother died when she was 4 years old. Her studies included by horsemanship, fencing, etc. Next, we
only you can tell, or somebody else also can join and continue.
Sir?
Can any one of the others talk about the remaining 3?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Anyway, you have done fine. Madam, you can say that. Yeah. Good. Good job. Yes.
Who is PV Sindhu? She is a badminton player. She won many medals and she played for India. She is
So the participation in the children's groups is clearly having a very positive impact to the girls' confidence and the ability for them to present in front of quite a senior board And as you heard, they're talking about role models that they may not have known about before. So it gives them that different line of sight to work to. As for specific outcomes of the project, the project is directly benefiting 400 youth, 60% girls, primarily aged 13 to 14 years in Hosur City. The youth are receiving training on enhanced knowledge and skills relevant to their local context. They're receiving access to materials, particularly for improved menstrual hygiene, and they're receiving vegetables and fruits produced by the school gardens and the urban gardens. What the project has done, it's partnered with 10 government schools whose teachers, administration and block education officers expressed an interest in and support for the project activities. And then within the selected schools, youth was selected based on their vulnerability as identified by project staff and in collaboration with teachers and the administration, where some of the criteria used to assess the vulnerability included low household income, risky household situations, for example, youth left at home or parents sought or worked elsewhere, possibly parents involved in high risk income activities, and youth already engaged in income generating activities, as well as youth and or family members with some form of disability. So this slide in particular shows on the left the children's groups where they learn about different topics each week, including nutrition, the environment, so globalization, hygiene, gender respect, menstruation hygiene, etc. And they also learn about this year COVID. And to the right is a photo of the school community gardens, where Marada identified an issue with the quality of the school lunches, where no fruit and vegetables were being provided. So the school community gardens fills that gap, as well as providing the children groups the additional knowledge and skills on nutrition and gardening in order to benefit their futures. The project also provides training to caregivers, parents, teachers, coaches on a range of topics, including children's rights, need for childhood success, child and youth development. And I would say as a component of this, this has actually led to some of the longer-term sustainability of the projects, where some of the school groups and school teachers have taken over the responsibility of running the school groups. So between the 2019 project, which has completed, and the next project, some of those schools and school groups were dropped away because the teachers in those particular schools took on that responsibility of running the children's groups because they saw the huge benefit and impact to their children. Unfortunately, COVID has obviously become a significant issue, and unfortunately, this in turn has become an additional barrier to children's education. The number of COVID cases in India is mammoth, 9.3 million cases with 135,000 deaths. And at this stage, it seems to be the second worst hit country after the US, with Tamil Nadu is one of the worst affected areas in India. Schools did close in March, and children were therefore without government-funded meals and access to PPE. So as a part of the project, what it provided was some personal protective equipment in order to allow the children to have some safety, as well as the caregivers to have some safety against COVID. And part of it, as well as part of the community children's groups and community resource person trainings, they also received training about COVID and community transmission and the prevention of COVID and transmission. These are some of the quotes, and this sort of demonstrates the impact that COVID has had on the children. So my parents are struggling to meet family needs because of COVID-19. I'm responsible for taking care of my younger siblings and household chores. I miss my school and miss my friends. I request form children's groups in our community, similar to our children's groups formed in my school, so we can have some relaxation, and at the same time we can learn many things. And my home is about 5 kilometres from my school. If you form children's groups at the community level, either near my home or near my school, my friend's home, I have a bus pass and I can come to attend the training. It is really suffocating for me to stay at home and I don't have access to learning. I'm really scared about my future. I just find it really hard to read those out aloud. It's had such a huge impact. So just as an example, here are a couple of photos of the PPE distribution and the types of things that we've been giving out to help give them additional protection. So that's a snapshot of the project. I don't know how long it took, roughly half an hour. So, but please, I do invite you to ask any questions, and I really do appreciate you participating here today and listening. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sean. That's great. I'm just going to share my screen now so others can see. So, we are moving to the Q&A portion of the session. Let me just go back a slide. And if you wanted to ask Sean a question, you could you can see on the screen where to click to enter your question, or go ahead and put it in the chat if that's too complicated for you. And I think I just want to say that it was really interesting to learn more about the project. And I noticed you commented about funding from MCIC. So yeah, this project was funded from the Manitoba Government Matching Grant Program, which is administered by MCIC. So I think while people are entering their questions, maybe I'll just ask a question of you while others are entering theirs. So you talked about how this program benefits girls and how girls are a big part of the design and the program and the outreach that you do. So we know that girls can often face additional barriers to education or training. So how does your program really work to address those barriers?
Yeah, that's a good question, very relevant. So there's a bunch of barriers to girls' education and youth education in general. I mean, one of the ones for girls is them not seeing themselves represented in higher learning and in skilled labour. So I think in part this project provides those girls with confidence, provides them with some basic leadership skills, and it's also giving them some technology training to know that, to sort of have that line of sight to what could be open to them for their future. In addition, I'd say other barriers would be culture and finances. So another part of it is having their mothers also earning income and giving the children the tools and the training, sort of the business acumen in order to potentially provide, to apply for scholarships for future learning. And then, of course, as it runs in parallel with the other projects, the concept that the mothers are involved in the self-help affinity groups and improving their economic outcomes will also provide them with the financial step up to actually engage in future education.
That's great. Sounds like a really multi-pronged approach to addressing those barriers. So thanks for explaining that. I had a question that's kind of sparked by what you shared, the quotes from some of the students. You know, a question I like to ask our presenters that I didn't tell you ahead of time is, you know, I think a lot of times people are really motivated to do this kind of work because of those stories that they hear. Students that you mentioned, their quotes about why it was so important for them to be part of this program. Are there any other moments like that from this program that really stood out to you? I know you had those two quotes from the students, but what really motivates you to keep going in this type of work?
I mean, you know, we're not necessarily having the direct connection with the students themselves, but we are having regular contact with our partner who is in direct connect with the students and their parents. So we are continually updated about the progresses, which gives us that sort of that motivation to keep on going. But I think particularly this year, what we've heard more of is the hardships and the impacts, particularly related to COVID. So, you know, seeing that need presented to us on a daily basis, but at the same time hearing the stories of how the girls are increasing their confidence with this year's project version of the project. Because the school gardens have closed, because the schools have closed, because the students no longer have access to the school gardens and the school lunches, they don't have sufficient nutrition and food. So as a part of that, so I don't know if you remember the photo, but of those green buckets were in the gardens. Each student and family gets 2 of those to take home to plant their own vegetables. And that supplements their nutritional requirements at home, which you know, it's a huge impact. I mean, that the issue of nutrition or insufficient nutrition leading to stunted growth and stunted development is a significant barrier to ongoing education. So having you know, being involved in that sort of ongoing work definitely keeps us going. I mean, it's what it's about.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that's really relevant for us too, as you know, our schools and everything here has been really adapted. So it's interesting to hear that the way they handled the gardening project was to send it home with the students. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and I mean, and just part of that is so that they have been trying to. I mean, they realised the social isolation issues, and they realised the breakaway from the education. So what they have been trying to do is maintain some kind of educational flow by doing school on radios and partly school over social media, where students have access to the internet and social media. So they've tried to keep it going, but like as you say, with you know, with those quotes, the children are still really feeling isolated. I mean, my children have felt isolated, but the children in Hoso City have really felt it.
Thanks for sharing that. I just have another question from a participant. They're just wondering if you could answer are any of Hope's projects in Ethiopia affected by the current conflict? So they're just asking about your projects in Ethiopia.
Yeah, good question. So directly, no. Our water system projects are based in the south. So some of our original projects were in Oromia. All of our projects now are based in SNM PR. So it is quite a ways from the Tigrayan region, but indirectly. I mean, I was just speaking to our country director the other day, and she was talking about how just how exhausted everybody is throughout this year. Of the separation, and I mean they haven't been allowed to travel between regions. Just the reduced funding, the sort of the reduced hope for the future, and so everybody is already exhausted. And so then now to have that conflict and essentially it's a war happen, it's really disheartening to everybody who is involved. So even though our projects are not directly affected, and she was reminding me how important it is for us to keep our projects going because they help with the COVID situation with wash, sanitation and hygiene, but they also provide the people in the communities that we benefit with that ongoing hope that a strong positive future is ahead.
Thanks for that answer. There was another question. So this program in India, is it similar to programs in other countries, or is it specific to India and to this region?
We have a lot of our sort of methodology is shared between our country projects and our partners. We do some cross transference of information and knowledge between our partners to help in that network and capacity building. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is similar. We tend to work in more isolated rural areas, And we also do a lot of work with marginalised Indigenous groups. So this project is possibly different in that it is working with an urban slum. But we have done some work in other urban slum areas, for example, in Honduras, in Guatemala City. We have a current project in Guatemala City working with urban school children as well. So we do generally follow the same process, particularly with self-help groups as well. So we run a lot of self-help groups in a lot of countries, the Philippines, Ethiopia, Dominican Republic, Haiti, that all follow a very similar model because it's so successful, particularly improved economic output and women empowerment. So that's, and I'd say Marada is, they're one of the leaders in the self-help group model. So yeah.
That's great. So it seems like you found a lot of success as you're replicating it in a lot of places. That's great.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
That's great to hear. So, at the beginning, I referenced that it was World Children's Day last Friday. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about what we can do to support children around the world. Like, obviously there's this project that's very exciting, but what else do you think we can do to support children around the world?
That's a big question.
Yes, it is. You can answer just a piece of it if you like.
So, I mean, the children have to have quality, good education. So that's, and to also understand the path to follow in that educational cycle, whether or not it's going from elementary to secondary to tertiary education. There needs to be some labour opportunities for the families of the children in order to provide for that educational cycle and the children to actually access that educational cycle. There needs to be ongoing advocacy for governments to improve that access and availability of quality education, and also to, especially when it comes to gender, to emphasise the importance of equal and equitable gender opportunity, educational opportunities for both genders. I'd say at the moment, we're seeing a lot of disruption in the educational systems, particularly as it relates to COVID, and also in relation to the ability of families to educate, to financially support education, given that a lot of households and family members are involved in daily labour positions, and because a lot of those positions have diminished because of mobility restrictions in a lot of those less developed countries. That economic and financial impact has really hit families, and so education often drops off that radar so that they can continue to provide food for families. So that is one of sort of the sacrifices, which is a shame. So as part of that as well, I'd say, given the current situation where potentially a lot more people are at home, and they're suffering sort of that financial and social trauma, I'd say, particularly if it's a high risk and vulnerable family who may have some history with GBV issues, then the children may be exposed more to gender-based violence, which is also a huge issue. So I'd say future programming, which also involves some element of psychosocial support for children to help with any trauma that has occurred. And then going back to the element of finances, and this is a particularly important one. For example, in Ethiopia, children can't go to school if they're busy fetching water. So giving them close access to clean water, accessible hygiene, accessible sanitation, and therefore providing those sort of livelihood opportunities for family members to increase the economic outcomes for their family, then children can go to school. So yeah, there is so much we can do, and it's such a huge need, particularly when it comes to world education. But yeah, that's some thoughts.
Yeah, I appreciate the way you're sharing how everything's so interconnected in these projects and these issues that you're trying to work on.
Yeah.
There's a couple questions have come in. So you spoke about the water project in Ethiopia. So I think this person is interested to know what's the sort of transition plan for a water project like that. Now, I get that's not the project you're talking about tonight, so you may not have the details all to hand.
Okay.
Sort of asking, does the community own it, or what happens when they're involved in building that water project?
I think it's a great question, and it sort of interrelates with almost all of the programs that we do. So, and yes, it is really important for us that the community owns it. So as part of our project, when we budget it out, we actually budget a proportion of community investment, which is in the form of community participation, community labour. So, for example, with Ethiopia, because we've been involved in Ethiopia for such a long time, what happens is the next village or site that we go to, it sort of follows a sort of a snowball effect where that particular village has heard of the work that we've done in the previous village, and they're coming to us saying, we want this help. We want you to come and help us. So what we've found is in a lot of those villages, it's usually because they have access to water sites in the form of springs, but sometimes they're 10, 14, 15 kilometres away, which involves several hours of walking per day. And because the spring sort of opens out into a dirty area, even the water that they are getting, which is clean to start with, the water they take home to the village is dirty. So it's full of bacteria, amoebas, it gives them diarrhea, gives them other sort of nasty health issues. So we sort of address that issue. But going back to the ownership, so what happens is the community is involved in laying the pipes. Sometimes we need to actually build road foundations in order to get materials into the villages, so that the community helps build those roads in order to access the community in the first place. And then as the project goes through, we have these self-help groups which run at the same time, where we're working with the women to increase their economic livelihood opportunities, but also giving them skills like bookkeeping and also empowerment to take decisions in community-based decision making. And so they sort of become members of what are the water committees, who are tasked with maintaining the water system. So therefore they become active in making sure the water system is managed well. And then by the end of it, we do this. So in that video where everybody's dancing and jumping up and down and celebrating, that is in fact a handover ceremony, where at the end of the project, we officially hand over the water system to the community and say, now this is yours, this is your water system. And what we found is all of the communities look after the water systems in an ongoing way. And because in Ethiopia, they are gravity-fed water systems, there's minimal moving parts, which means there's very minimal breakage anyways.
That's great. Thanks for that answer. Someone else is saying, thanks so much for sharing. They said they're wondering if there's any resources you would recommend reading to learn more about children's rights in these different countries. So I don't know if you have anything in your mind about children's rights, or maybe learning about these projects in different countries. Maybe one way to take that.
I would be very willing to make out a list and send it to you. There's the UNCRC, so the rights of the children. So I mean that's kind of like a foundational document which lays out the rights of the children.
I personally like the version that's done in child-friendly language. That's the one I had on the screen. There's a few different versions you can find online, because I like the child-friendly version too.
Yeah,
bureaucratic, speak more understandable.
I think you said at the beginning that I used to work for the UN. So I worked for the UN for 14 years or something, and it is so full of bureaucratic language. And what we try and emphasize is, break it down to simple language that everybody uses, everybody understands. And I would go for that. I would say, if you have access to a child language, child-friendly, layperson-friendly CRC, that's what you should be reading.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I will say, you can find it just by searching in Google, child-friendly language. There's another question about the Ethiopia project. So I guess you're talking about two projects tonight. That's great. People are going to learn a lot about all your programs. They're just wondering, do you have any challenges getting local people to contribute that sort of sweat equity you talked about to build the water systems? Is there any competition with other paying work opportunities, or do you find it hard to line up people to help you with that?
None at all. The communities we work with in Ethiopia are so isolated that if there's any daily labour opportunities, it is very, very minimal. You know, there's a community that we've been working with in Gabanzagala where we basically haven't been able to access the community by car for most of the last 12 months because there's been so much rain that the roads have been absolutely impassable. And then probably 4 months ago, there was ongoing landslides in the area, which completely blocked off the community and access to the community. So what we did was we actually ran some relief support there, and the community walked 20 kilometres in order to get sacks of rice to travel back to the community. So I'd say, I mean, the fact that we do work with such isolated communities plays a part of that. But also I'd say, because we've been involved in these countries with these partners for such a long time, they see the benefit that we've had with the previous community. So because they've even you know, in a culture where women generally don't make decisions and they're generally confined to household chores, you know, sometimes in some communities it's can be a challenge or a barrier for the men to allow women to meet in groups and to start raising money. But even with that, with the pre-involvement of communities in the neighbouring areas, they see what's happening and they're coming to us saying, we want this, we will do this work support. I mean, it really makes it simple when you have that much success.
Thank you. Well, I think we've reached the end of our questions. I want to thank everyone for those excellent questions, and thank you, Sean, for presenting. I just wanted to also encourage everyone, if you enjoyed this presentation, join us in the new year for our next Local Brews and Global Views. We'll be putting that up on social media closer to the time. And just to say also that a short survey about this event is going to come out in your email through the Eventbrite system. So please just fill it out and share your feedback. This really helps us to know your thoughts on the evening. And so I'd invite everyone to just put some pluses in the chat as our applause for Sean. So thank you so much, Sean, and thanks everyone for attending. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.